Lin Xiaowen's mind felt groggy and heavy. She could smell a salty and fishy scent distinctive to the beach, while the sound of waves beating on the shore faintly traveled to her ears. This must be a dream. It must be. Her hometown was located in the inner regions. She had only seen the sea once in her life when she visited her sister, who studied in a university located beside the sea. Why would she be able to hear the sound of waves now? Lin Xiaowen tried her best to open her eyes, but she was unable to break away from the clinging darkness. It felt like a nightmare. Her mind was sober, but she couldn't wake up. Second sister, second sister. Wah! Second sister, you can't die. Shito isn't hungry anymore. Shito doesn't want to eat steamed buns anymore. Second sister, please wake up. Lin Xiaowen felt a light weight beside herself, shaking her arm desperately. Second sister, that wasn't right. She was the eldest child in her family. Her parents had died when she was in middle school. As the eldest sister, she dropped out of school to work and raise her younger siblings all by herself. She has been called eldest sister for over 20 years. Why was she suddenly being called second sister? He must have made a mistake. So wicked. The child had just wanted to pick up a steamed bun to eat, yet that woman had beat her as if she wanted to kill her. Xiao Sao has always been a child with a weak constitution. Can she still survive after having her head smashed in? Look at how much blood there is. Is she still alive? Moreover, it was the child's aunt who did it. A steamed bun doesn't even cost much money. She hit her so hard the child's head slammed against the ship. I've never seen such a cruel person. Xiao Sao's father is the most famous fisherman around this area. He's also a good hunter. If it wasn't for him, old Yu's family wouldn't have been able to build that new 5-room house and ship. Why couldn't she just let the child eat a steamed bun? The child doesn't seem to be doing that well. Quick, call her mother over. If this drags on, she might not even be able to see her child's last moments. Li Guiwa really has a sharp tongue and cruel heart. She was so vicious even to her own niece. We should keep our distance from her. Otherwise, she might backstab us if we accidentally offend her in the future. Ellipsis ellipsis. Lin Xiaowen's ears buzzed with the voices of strangers. Her senses were gradually returning. She felt herself lying on soft sands and her forehead was aching with pain. She seemed to be surrounded by a large crowd. This is such a strange dream. When can she wake up? What nonsense are you talking about? If you don't know what happened, then don't speak blindly. That darned girl stole a steamed bun that I brought back from my maiden home. I just scolded her a little and lightly pushed her a couple of times. Who could have thought that she would bump into that ship? Didn't you see me tell my son, Haitzi, to call for a doctor? She snorted. So much money is needed to take care of her fragile body, but she was born in a poor family. She's always sick, just like her mother. What an utter waste of food. The woman spoke with a sharp voice, which sounded like a broken gong. Second sister didn't steal the steamed bun. Brother Haitzi dropped it on the ground and didn't want it since it was dirty. Second sister picked it up because I was hungry. Second sister isn't a thief. It was a young child's voice. He was obviously sobbing, but his voice still sounded abnormally clear. You little brat, you've already learned how to lie at such a young age. Your brother Haitzi clearly said your second sister stole it, yet you still won't admit it. I just gently pushed her. Maybe she purposely bumped her head on that ship. She might just be using her injury to escape punishment. A sense of guilt emerged within that woman's bitter tone. Dashan's wife, your words are unfair. The child has a huge bloody hole in her head and it seems like she's about to stop breathing. You're still trying to accuse the child of using her injury to avoid punishment. She was still just a little girl, so how would she be able to think of such a trick? The speaker's voice sounded old, but it was full of energy and hidden rage. That's right, that's right. That woman is seriously vile. She battered the child so harshly because of a piece of bun. Moreover, they're relatives. Lin Xiaowen wanted to open her eyes and see how impressive that vicious woman was. However, her eyelids felt extremely heavy. She couldn't open her eyes no matter how hard she tried. Cower. It was a tired voice that also sounded anxious and pained. Lin Xiaowen felt her body being lifted by a pair of thin and weak arms. Several drops of warm tears fell on her face. Such a warm embrace. The feeling of having a mother, how long has it been? Since her mother passed away from a car accident when she was 14, she had never felt such a warm and secure feeling. Even though she had gritted her teeth and learned to be strong in life, Lin Xiaowen still felt the urge to cry. Younger sister, she's bleeding a lot. Mother, it's not the time to be crying. Quickly call for a doctor. This was a young girl's voice. She sounded to be at most 10 years old, but, who's she calling? Younger sister. She wouldn't be calling me, right? A bad feeling suddenly emerged within Lin Xiaowen's heart. What kind of dream is this? Why is it starting to feel even more real? Ow, her forehead really hurts and the feeling of being embraced. This definitely wasn't a dream. However, she had clearly lived as Lin Xiaowen for 29 years. Why did she suddenly turn into cower? Move away. Quickly move. Dr. Yu is here. Dr. Yu, please save cower. Please save my daughter. The woman, who was holding her, didn't know what to do besides crying. At this time, she finally raised her head and pleaded with the doctor while trembling. Her voice was weak and helpless. Set the child down. Let me stop her bleeding first. Lin Xiaowen felt a pair of hands gently wiping the blood on her forehead. When her wound was being cleaned, she felt a sharp pain that made her body shake violently. She opened her eyes slightly, but the piercing light made her shut her eyes again. She's awake. She's awake. Xiao Xiao is awake. Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Dr. Yu gently helped the young girl bandage her wound, while saying, it's good that she's awake. However, her body has always been weak and she had bled so much just now. She needs to properly rest for some time. Be sure to give her some nutritious foods to help her recover. Lin Xiaowen slightly opened her eyes and slowly got used to the brightness. She was stunned when she finally saw her surroundings. Why was she surrounded by a group of people wearing ancient period clothing? She thought back to the voices she had heard earlier. Did she get caught up in a ridiculous transmigration plot? Cower, you're awake. Does your head hurt? Tell mother, do you still feel uncomfortable anywhere? Lin Xiaowen turned her head towards the voice and stared into a gaze full of concern and pain. This her mother. Isn't she too young? She didn't look that much older than herself. Younger sister, who beat you up like that? I'll go scold them for you. This thin little girl, who seems to be less than 10 years old, was her older sister. Lin Xiaowen widened her eyes, then lowered her head to look at herself. She saw a pair of tiny hands and a small body. She smiled bitterly in her heart. Did the heavens take pity on the difficult life she had previously and granted her a chance to regain her childhood? However, why didn't the heavens give her a better family? The whole family were dressed in rags and their faces were wan and haggard. They were so poor that they would even pick up a steamed bun that someone else had thrown away. Doesn't that seem too miserable? Lin Xiaowen gradually recovered from the shock of being transmigrated. Since she had already came, she's just going to go with the flow. Her younger siblings from her previous life had already gotten jobs and formed their own families. It was probably a good time for her to step back and rest. However, she did wonder if her siblings would be sad about her suddenly passing away. For a moment, Lin Xiaowen fell into a trance. She thought back to when she was 15. She had just entered the second year of middle school that year. Her parents had left early in the morning to sell vegetables like usual, but they had gotten in a car accident on the way and passed away. Her uncles hastily took care of her parents' funeral before leaving in a hurry, as if they were scared that the 3 orphan children would cling on to them. As the eldest sister, she had dropped out of school ever since she was young. She took the heavy responsibility of raising her siblings on her slender shoulders. That year, her sister was 12, while her brother had just turned 10. Over the next 14 years, she not only took care of their family's 3 acres of farmland, but also worked various jobs for the sake of her younger siblings' school fees. She was afraid that she wouldn't be hired because of her age, so she would lie by saying that she was 17 and that she just looked young. She had sold vegetables, helped others sell fruits, and worked as a waiter. She had also worked in a factory. Later on, the lady boss of a braised food store had helped her after she noticed that she was able to endure hardships and was honest and kind. The lady boss also pitied her due to her circumstances. Thus, she hired her to help out in her store. The braised food store provided good benefits. Accommodation and meals were provided, and the wage was higher than other stores. The lady boss had also taught her the secret recipes for her braised foods without any reservation. Later on, when the lady boss decided to return to her hometown, she sold the braised food store, which was well known and doing rather well, to her at a low price. With this small braised food store, she was able to earn enough money to support her younger siblings through middle school and high school. Her younger sister was an intelligent child and her heart ached for her sister who had to wake up while it was still dark to work in order to send her to school. After graduating high school, her younger sister skipped the national college entrance examination without telling her and secretly followed the other girls from the village to find work in the south. Lin Xiaowen had cried her heart out for this matter when she found out. She hated herself for being useless and hindering her sister's future. Even if it wasn't a famous university, her sister should have been able to enter a decent university with her grades. Her younger brother had always ranked at the top of his class since he was young. He had even skipped a grade in both elementary school and middle school. When he was 15 and still a sophomore in high school, he had pestered his homeroom teacher to help him register for the national college entrance examination. On his career form, he only filled in military academy as his first admission choice and left all the other slots blank. There were no tuition fees for the military academy and they also gave a standard allowance. Those with excellent grades would be assigned to the local army and would even be ranked as a deputy officer. She knew that her brother had just wanted to lessen her burden. 14 years had passed in a blink of an eye. While working, her sister had continued to study and earned a bachelor's degree. After that, she became a white-collar worker and even found love. Her younger brother performed outstandingly while studying in the military academy. He graduated when he was 19 years old and was assigned to the Jinling military camp. He became the youngest officer in the camp. Later on, her tall and handsome brother, who was exceptional in all areas, caught the eye of the deputy commander of the camp. The deputy commander introduced his granddaughter to her brother and they fell in love. When they got married, her sister also brought along her white-collar husband and their 1-year-old son to the wedding. After seeing her younger siblings with their own happy families, she was so happy that she drank a few more cups of wine. After the wedding banquet, when she was walking down the stairs, she accidentally missed a step and fell down the stairs. When she woke up again, she had already entered the body of this weak, little fisher girl. You're my mother. Lin Xiaowen didn't retain any memories from the original host of this body. However, she had coincidentally hit her head, so that gave her a good opportunity to pretend to have amnesia. Weren't all transmigration novels just like this? That weak-looking woman already had a pale face, but her face became even more ashen. She wobbled and asked in disbelief, "Cower, what's wrong? Why can't you even remember your own mother? Dr. Yu, what's exactly wrong with my daughter?" Dr. Yu was an old man in his 50s. He stroked his beard and frowned. After a moment of deliberation, he said, "When I was younger, I had read a medical book that mentioned a similar case. There was a man who stumbled down a mountain and injured his head, losing all his memories. Little girl, try thinking a little harder, can you remember anything?" Lin Xiaowen, who was now Yu Xiaosao, scrunched up her face and pretended to think harder. After a long moment, she shook her head firmly and said, "My mind is completely blank. I can't remember anything at all. My poor daughter. Dr. Yu, can Cower's illness be cured? Is there any danger to her life?" Yu Xiaosao's new mother in this lifetime held her hand and wept silently. The villagers surrounding them clicked their tongues, shook their heads, and sighed. Madame Lu's life had been rather tough. Her mother-in-law was vicious and harsh, while her sister-in-law was lazy and selfish. After she gave birth to her youngest son, she didn't get to properly recuperate. Thus, she became prone to illness. However, her mother-in-law still ordered her around without letting her rest. Even after all that, her mother-in-law was still unsatisfied with her and constantly picked on her. Although her husband was capable to earning money, Madame Lu had never received a single cent before her mother-in-law, Madame Zhang, pocketed all the money. Her younger daughter was born sickly and wasn't expected to live very long. Now she even injured her head. Dr. Yu consoled her, "Don't worry. As long as there aren't any other symptoms, her health wouldn't be affected." Maybe she will start recovering her memories after a few more days. Bring her home first so that she doesn't catch a cold. Thank you so much, Dr. Yu. We've troubled you again. Yu Xiaoxiao's mother, Madame Lu, wiped her tears with the corner of her clothes and bent down to pick up her daughter. However, a young man in his 20s had already picked Yu Xiaoxiao up before she could do so and said, "Second sister-in-law, let me carry her." Yu Xiaoxiao blinked and stared at this tall and thin man with curiosity. He was a young man with a refined aura. As someone with the mentality of a 26 years old, it felt somewhat weird to be carried by a young man like this. The young man flashed a smile at her and asked, "Xiaoxiao, do you still remember third uncle?" "I don't remember you." Yu Xiaoxiao shook her head honestly. Her movement pulled on her wound and made her grimace in pain. The young man hastened his pace and carried her towards a room inside a courtyard. Yu Xiaoxiao wanted to walk by herself, but she had lost too much blood. She was still too dizzy and weak, so she could only stay in her third uncle's arms. She just kept reminding herself, "I'm a child, I'm just a child right now." Her eyes weren't idle as she carefully looked around and got a general idea about her surroundings. This was a small fishing village that was close to the sea. There were mostly old straw houses in the village. Their family had a 5-room residence with a courtyard, so they can be considered a family with above-average living conditions in the village. However, if her family had decent living conditions, why had the original host of this body died because of a small and dirty piece of steamed bun? What happened? A white-haired old woman with deep wrinkles around her mouth came out from the main room. When she saw her daughter-in-law carrying a blood-covered Yu Xiaoxiao in her arms, she frowned and grumbled, "You went out so early this morning. Where did you go? Wouldn't her head injury cost a lot of money to be treated? A family full of sick and useless people. Even a rich family will be ruined by all the medical fees. Second daughter-in-law, is this how you look after your daughter?" Second sister didn't fall by herself. Eldest aunt pushed her. The little boy, Shito, swiftly replied. He straightened his back, trying to protect his sick and weak sister. The wrinkles on the old woman's face deepened as she furrowed her brows. Her fierce gaze shot towards the plump figure hidden behind them. She coldly shouted, "Eldest daughter-in-law, what exactly happened?" Her eldest daughter-in-law, Madame Li's, eyes darted around before she answered evasively, "Haitzi told me that Xiaoxiao stole a steamed bun from my room. I just didn't manage to hold back my anger." Xiaoxiao's older twin sister, Yu Xiaolian, wasn't as amicable as her mother. She shouted at the fat Haitzi, who was hiding behind his mother, "Brother Haitzi always lies, so how can we still believe in his words?" Li Guiwa's imposing manner had slightly deflated, but, when she saw her precious son being criticized, she immediately bounced back like a rubber ball. "You little brat, who are you calling a liar? You're still refusing to admit that you stole something. Who would still throw a whole steamed bun on the ground when the harvest had been so bad recently? Haitzi, come over here. Quickly come and tell everyone how that damned girl, Xiaoxiao, stole our steamed bun." Yu Zhe, whose nickname was Haitzi, was tanned and fat. He was the eldest child among the younger generation of the family and was spoiled by his mother. Although he was usually a bully in front of his younger siblings, he was actually a complete coward. Xiaoxiao had been battered until she was bloody and nearly died because of his careless words. It was impossible for him to not feel guilty at all. He kept muttering without actually saying anything relevant until Madame Li smacked him several times. When he finally summoned up the courage to continue lying, he was interrupted by Xiaoxiao's older brother, Yu Hang. "Brother Haitzi, do you still remember the story of the wrong souls coming back for justice? Also, the myths about the 18 levels of hell?" Eldest aunt had also said this earlier, "Liars will have their tongues cut off in hell." The 10-year-old Yu Hang was usually very quiet, but he had clearly seen through the current situation. Haitzi guiltily looked at Xiaoxiao, who was being carried by her mother. The sickly and pale Yu Xiaoxiao silently stared at him with her empty eyes. She barely had any flesh on her small face, which made her eyes look frighteningly big. Her dark pupil nearly filled up her entire eyeball. Her face was also stained with streaks of blood. Wasn't this exactly the same as the wronged ghosts mentioned in the story? Haitzi was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He didn't dare to look at her again and buried his head into his mother's embrace. He screeched like a dying pig, "I wasn't the one who had hurt you, so don't come looking for me. What I said earlier doesn't count. I dropped the steamed bun on the ground and didn't want it anymore because it was dirty. Wah! Don't take my soul away. I don't want to go to hell and have my tongue be cut off." Ellipsis quote. The truth has been revealed, so Madam Lee can't even argue anymore. She was so angry that she smacked her son's back several times. Under the onlookers' scrutinizing eyes, she could only give in. "Darned brat, why did you lie? Second sister-in-law, I've already scolded him, so don't take a child's action to heart." Yu Lichun, who had followed behind them, spoke up at this time. "Why are you still fighting over a steamed bun when the child was already injured like this? Sister-in-law, you should hurry up and give Dr. Yu the medical fees." Yu Lichun was the eldest brother of Xiaoxiao's grandfather, Old Yu. The two families didn't have a close relationship due to Xiaoxiao's grandmother, Madame Zhang. When Madame Zhang heard that she needed to pay for that useless brat's medical fees, she widened her eyes and spoke through gritted teeth. "Brother-in-law, that's easy for you to say. Pay for her medical fees. All the money that we had wasted on that brat and her mother every year is enough to feed an entire family. Where am I going to find the money to pay for them? Money doesn't just fall from the sky for our family, so we can't just spend it carelessly. It's a small wound, so just cover it with some plant ash and it'll be fine. She doesn't need any medicine. She's not her real granddaughter, so of course she doesn't want to pay." The villagers, who had followed along, shook their heads and sighed. Madame Zhang was actually Yu Hai's stepmother, who married Old Yu after Yu Hai's mother died. After they got married, she gave birth to their third son, Yu Bo, and a daughter, Yu Katie. The eldest son, Yu Dashan, was a child Madame Zhang had from her previous marriage. He had changed his surname after his mother married into the Yu family. Yu Lichun cried out against the injustice for his nephew, third sister-in-law. Dahai goes out to the sea to fish every day before dawn. He would also frequently go up the mountain to hunt for pheasants and wild rabbits, then sell them in town. Moreover, all the money he makes goes to the family. We, the villagers, aren't blind. If Dahai wasn't in your family, would your family be able to build this 5-room house? Can your family afford the new ship? His daughter is badly injured right now, yet you can't even bear to spend some money. How can he not be disappointed? Madame Zhang was upset when she heard Yu Lichun's words. "Brother-in-law, according to your words, Dahai is the only reason our family is doing well. Let me tell you right now, I'm not going to pay the medical fees. Whoever caused this mess and injured her should be responsible for paying." After she finished speaking, she turned around and went back into the room, slamming the door loudly. Madame Lee's fleshy body trembled slightly and she muttered in a low voice, "All our money is in mother's hands. I don't have any money." Then, she pulled her son back to their own room. Madame Lu gave Dr. Yu a bitter smile and said, "Dr. Yu, I'll have my husband send over the medical fees when he comes back. My apologies." Under everyone's sympathetic gazes, Madame Lu sent away Dr. Yu and the villagers. Yu Xiaoxiao, who was set down on the Kong bed, stared at the affectionate Madame Lu. She didn't really know how she felt right now. Even though this mother seemed weak and unreliable, she finally had a mother to love her again after 14 years. Yu Heng stroked Xiaoxiao's hair while speaking to his mother. "Mother, youngest sister had been weak and often sick ever since she was born. This time, she even suffered a major injury. Grandpa Yu told us to feed her more nutritious foods to help her recover." A brief moment of silence filled the entire room. Madame Lu thought of her stingy mother-in-law and went out of the room with an agonized expression on her face. After she left, Shito came closer and caressed her face with his cold hands. He whispered into her ears with his tender voice, "Older sister, rest well and get better soon. Tomorrow, I'll bring you an egg to eat." Yu Xiaoxiao sorted out her emotions, then smiled at the young child. She chatted with the cute kid for a while before she felt a wave of fatigue. Right before she fell into a deep slumber, she heard Madame Lu timidly saying, "Mother, the doctor said that Kao's body is weak and that she'll need to eat some nourishing foods. She only drank a few mouthfuls of porridge in the morning, so I want to make some egg soup for her." "Eat, eat, eat." Even a wealthy family wouldn't be able to withstand the sufferings caused by all of you patients. Calling for a doctor and getting medications, which of these doesn't require money? We still need to sell the eggs the next time the market opens. There's still some white rice inside the jar, so just take some to make a bowl of congee. Yu Xiaoxiao's body was originally weak and she had just suffered excessive blood loss. Thus, she finally couldn't resist the call for sleep and fell into a deep slumber. She slept for a very long time this time. She didn't wake up even when they were feeding her the congee and medicine. She felt as if she had fallen into a bottomless darkness. No matter how much she struggled, she was unable to escape from the endless despair. After an unknown amount of time, when she was about to give up and accept her fate, a glimmer of light shone within the darkness. A frustrated yet sweet-sounding voice appeared in her mind. Darn it, how did I accidentally pledge my loyalties to a weak human being? What should I do? What should I do now? I should just ignore her. If she dies, then our master-servant relationship will be void. However, I don't know when I would be able to come out again. That damned goddess of spirits. She actually sealed most of this mighty divine stone's spiritual powers, then abandoned it in some random human realm. It had waited for exactly 800 years before it was picked up by a human woman. However, she had died before it was able to acknowledge its master. It used up all its remaining spiritual powers to bring that human woman's soul to another realm and found a suitable body for her to revive in. If it didn't save her with all its powers, then it might really have to experience another 800 years before waking up again. It's better to be a little weaker than stay in endless darkness. However, the wound on her head seems like it would need to use the little spiritual powers that it still had to heal her. While Yu Xiaoxiao was amazed by that talkative glowing orb, she suddenly felt a cool and refreshing feeling on the wound on her forehead. The painful sensation was also gone. As the darkness around her gradually faded, she slowly opened her heavy eyelids. A dim lamp was lit inside the room. She could faintly see thin Madame Lu laying on the edge of the Kong bed. Her breathing could be clearly heard in the silence. Yu Xiaoxiao recalled that strange dream she just had. She lifted her arm and touched her forehead. It really didn't hurt anymore. Was that not a dream? Did that glowing golden orb, who calls itself a divine stone, really exist? Did it also cure the injury on her head? Yu Xiaoxiao felt really hot and stuffy since she was tightly covered by a blanket. She took her arms out of the blanket and noticed a red string bracelet on her thin wrist. There was a multicolored stone threaded on the red string. Wasn't this the small stone that she picked up in a mountain stream near the Potala Palace, that only time she went on a vacation? The stone was only about the size of a marble. It appeared smooth and round as it sat in the middle of the creek. She had picked it up because she thought that the colorful stone looked really beautiful at that time. After taking it back, she made a hole in it, threaded it on a red string, and wore it on her wrist. Later on, when she was preparing braised foods, she felt that it wasn't convenient to wear it while working. Thus, she just casually threw it aside and forgot about it. Why did it transmigrate and reincarnate with her? Cower, you're awake. You've slept for exactly 3 days. If you still didn't wake up, I was about to take you to town to see a doctor. Madame Lu, who was lying on the Kong bed, noticed the movement and raised her head. She cried out in happiness when she looked up and saw her daughter studying the rainbow stone. Yu Xiaoxiao stared intently at Madame Lu. Her first impression of her mother was that she was thin. Although she had a beautiful and gentle face, it looked thin and pale. Her hands, which were fixing her blanket, were full of rough calluses and scars. With one glance at her hands, it was obvious that she was constantly performing manual labor. Mother, although Madame Lu wasn't that much older than her in her previous life, she was touched by the maternal love within her eyes. Thus, she couldn't help but call out to her. No one had looked at her with such a loving gaze ever since her mother passed away when she was 14. Yu Xiaoxiao suddenly felt like crying. Don't cry, cower. Does your wound still hurt? Mother will blow on it for you. Lu Muyun gently blew on her daughter's bandaged head, then she quickly turned around and wiped her tears with her sleeve. When she was pregnant with the twins, she accidentally fell into the water while washing clothes and gave birth prematurely. Although Shaolian was slightly underweight, She grew up with a healthy body. However, it was a different situation for Xiaoxiao. She couldn't even drink milk at first. Furthermore, she would frequently fall ill. There were even several times when she almost didn't survive. Her child needed to take medicine throughout the year, but their family haven't split off yet. All the money that her husband earned from fishing and hunting must be handed to her mother-in-law. Every time she asked her mother-in-law for money to get medicine, she was always reluctant to give it to her and would say a bunch of unpleasant words. Her eldest sister-in-law would also make jeering remarks on the side. She can endure anything for her child. However, she had never expected that her daughter almost died in the hands of her eldest sister-in-law. The doctor had clearly instructed them to nourish Xiaoxiao with more nutrition, but her mother-in-law was unwilling to even give them an egg. Lu Muyan's face was full of helplessness as she looked at the dark night sky outside the window. She had already married into the Yu family for 13 years. Every day, she had to be the first to wake up and last to sleep. She always exhausted because she was responsible for nearly all of the household chores. She's not afraid of being tired, but her mother-in-law was never satisfied with her no matter what she does. She often had to suffer from her demanding gaze and mocking remarks. Even her children were treated poorly. There was no one in the family who she could rely upon. Xiaoxiao was injured by eldest sister-in-law and was unconscious for 3 days, but eldest brother's family didn't even appear once. Her youngest sister-in-law and father-in-law were the only ones who came to check on Xiaoxiao. "Cower, are you hungry? Your youngest aunt gave us an egg. I kept it warm with some hot water." Lu Muyun peeled the eggshell for her daughter. She had a satisfied smile on her face as she watched her daughter slowly eat the egg. She continued, "My good daughter, you should rest some more. Mother will go prepare dinner. Your favorite congee, too, will be ready by the time you're awake. I'll be sure to make it thick and add some pickled vegetables in it. I'll bring a large bowl of it for our cower to eat." Yu Xiaoxiao remembered what she had heard before she fell asleep. Her mother was rejected after she had asked this body's grandmother for an egg. It seems like her family rarely had the chance to eat fine grains such as white rice and wheat flour. For this bowl of congee, Madame Lu would probably have to endure people cruelly mocking her. Her heart somewhat ached for her. "Mother, I'll just eat whatever everyone else is eating. Don't separately prepare something just for me. Didn't I already eat an egg today?" Lu Muyun went to open the door, but briefly paused after hearing her words. She hid her feeling of helplessness within her smile and said, "It's all right. The doctor said that you lost too much blood and need some nourishment. Your father was heartbroken when he found out that you got injured, so he asked your Uncle Zhao to go hunting early this morning. They should be coming back soon. At noon, you'll be able to drink thick chicken soup and eat your favorite drumstick." The door closed with a squeak and the room was quiet again. Yu Xiaoxiao propped herself up and touched the wound on her head. She remembered her dream and took out her arm with the multicolored stone tied on her wrist. She gently shook the rainbow stone, which didn't appear to be very special. She muttered to herself, "It was clearly just my soul that was transmigrated, so how did I bring this stone over? I must have been dreaming earlier. It's just a useless stone. How could it be a divine stone? You're a useless stone. Your whole family are useless stones." Suddenly, a bright spot appeared above the multicolored stone and a child's infuriated voice emerged within Yu Xiaoxiao's mind. She was so shocked that she almost threw the stone away in her hand. That bright spot gradually became a small golden ball the size of a child's fist. A pair of big round eyes and a small mouth appeared on the glowing orb, which was leisurely floating in the air. At this time, the small glowing orb was glaring at her angrily with a puffed-up face, which made it look rather cute. Yu Xiaoxiao reached out her hand and wanted to hold up the small glowing orb. However, that little thing quickly flew away with a haughty and amusing expression on its face. "Don't be angry. I'll apologize to you, all right. You're really a divine stone. Do you really have the ability to heal injuries? Were you the one who healed the wound on my head?" Yu Xiaoxiao asked a series of questions. The haughty divine stone snorted disdainfully and said, This divine stone, was the only mystic stone that Goddess Nuwa personally refined. Don't you think I'm amazing? However, most of my power was sealed by that damned linger. How else would I had been stained by a weak human being's blood and foolishly accepted you as my master? Your powers have already been sealed. Why are you still bragging about yourself? Stop with your nonsense about weak human beings. The master-servant relationship has already been established, so I'm your master now. It's not like I'm happy about this situation. You're just a useless stone that had your powers sealed. I can't even eat you when I'm hungry, nor drink you when I'm thirsty. What can I even use you for? Yu Xiaoxiao had originally thought that she would be invincible with a point of her finger, just like what was written in the novels. Thus, she pouted in disappointment. The small glowing orb turned into a furious little kitten with golden fur and immediately rushed towards her. Its tiny paws almost scratched Yu Xiaoxiao's face as it screamed. Who says I'm useless? Who cured the wound on your head? With that big hole in your head, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even be able to get up from the Kong bed for at least half a month. How else would you still have the energy to argue with me? Despite having most of my powers sealed, I'm still a stone that was personally refined by Goddess Nuwa. My bathing water alone can prolong life and cure all kinds of illnesses. Moreover, it can also enhance beauty and maintain youthfulness. Bathing water. Yu Xiaoxiao blinked her eyes a few times. The small glowing orb seemed to have noticed her doubt and said, before I was picked out by Goddess Nuwa, I was a multicolored stone from a mountain stream. Thus, I really like to bathe in water. While I'm bathing, my energy would emit into the water and create unexpected effects. Your body is too weak, so you should drink more of my bathing water. I can ensure you that your body will become strong and healthy. You won't suffer from any more illnesses. The small glowing orb used its short paws to pat itself on the chest, as if it was selling quack remedies. Yu Xiaoxiao had somewhat believed in it earlier, but she became rather unconvinced now. You don't believe me. How can you not believe in me? Humph, humph. I seriously need to show you, this mortal, how awesome I am. The small glowing orb was furious and flew around the room in a rampage. Then, it rushed towards the wound on her head and emitted a faint golden light, which enveloped her wound over the gauze. After a while, Yu Xiaoxiao untied the gauze on her head. Originally, her wound was only partially healed, but the scab was almost ready to be removed now. She didn't remove the dry scab because she was afraid that she couldn't give an explanation when it's time to change her medicine. The small glowing orb proudly snorted at her. However, unexpected sadness comes after extreme joy. Its powers had been depleted, so it abruptly fell down and disappeared into the multicolored stone. The moment it disappeared, Yu Xiaoxiao heard the little fellow speaking with a weak voice, "Remember to soak me in water. It can help me recover my spiritual powers. Cowards awake, let me go take a look. I caught a pheasant today. Quickly go and stew it for my precious daughter." A man's voice sounded from the courtyard. Although it couldn't be considered a pleasant voice, but he sounded very warm. Yu Xiaoxiao hastily wrapped the gauze back on her head. Her wound was still bleeding a couple days ago. Wouldn't it be weird if it was healed in just 3 days? The door creaked open right after she finished wrapping the bandage on her head. The wind mischievously entered through the crack and fiddled with the dim candlewick. A tall and burly figure appeared in front of Yu Xiaoxiao's eyes. Father. Yu Xiaoxiao had vaguely heard that her new father was a very capable man, so she was very curious about why he would let his wife and children live so miserably. The man swiftly walked towards the Kong bed. She could vaguely see his face under the dim light. He had healthy-looking tan skin with thick eyebrows and big eyes. With a tall nose and wide mouth, he appeared very masculine. My precious daughter, you had seriously scared me. Fortunately, we were blessed by the heavens and it turned out to be a false alarm. After sleeping for so long, you must be hungry, right? Your favorite chicken soup will be ready soon. Yu Hai carefully observed his daughter's complexion. She really looked much better than this morning, so he happily supported her to sit up and stuffed a pillow behind her back for her to lean on. Yu Xiaoxiao's mouth couldn't help twitching when she heard him speak in a gentle tone as if he was coaxing a child. She was already a 29-year-old woman, so it made her really uncomfortable to be treated like a young child. Yu Xiaoxiao gently replied, I've already ate an egg and congee. Let mother and younger brother drink the chicken soup. Mother's body is weak, so she needs to nourish her body. Also, younger brother is still young and had suffered a major fright today. Yu Hai gently caressed his daughter's head with his big fan-like hand, while carefully avoiding her wound. He grinned and revealed a mouthful of white teeth. Our cower is so understanding. You already know how to take care of your mother and younger brother. But, don't worry, we have enough for everyone. We'll leave the rest simmering on the stove, so you can eat it when you're hungry later. Yu Shaolian heard him and came in with a pout. Father, stop coaxing us. As soon as you entered the courtyard with the pheasant, people from the east room had already set their eyes on it. Just Brother Haitzi can eat half the chicken. By the time it's our turn, we would be considered lucky if they leave some scraps. If there's no more, then I'll just hunt for some more tomorrow. Yu Hai smiled at her good-naturedly. Don't. Her older twin sister, Yu Shaolian, secretly rolled her eyes. If you caught more, then it would be even less likely for us to eat anything. You didn't get to see grandmother's pained expression when we needed to pay for the medical fees. She would surely find ways to make up for the loss, while also doubling the earnings. Stop. How can a child reprimand their elder like this? Yu Hai scolded her with a rather gentle tone. After that, he turned toward Xiaoxiao with a smile. Don't worry. Father will watch over the stove. I'll make sure Cower gets a share even if no one else in this family does. Yu Shaolian stuck her tongue out behind his back, then smiled at her sister. Everything is great about our father, but it would be better if he can have a firmer attitude. Grandmother is oppressing us, yet our father is a dutiful son and our mother's personality is too gentle. Yu Xiaoxiao had just transmigrated here, so she still hadn't figured out this family's situation. She simply smiled as she listened. When she lowered her head and saw the rainbow stone on her wrist, she hastily asked, Shaolian, can you bring me some water? There's some bloodstains on the stone. She was too used to being the eldest child in her previous life, so it was really hard for her to call an 8-year-old girl, older sister. The morning sun quietly lit up the night sky of early spring. In the courtyard, chickens began to crow with their necks stretched out. Yu Xiaoxiao's older twin sister, Yu Shaolian, quietly dressed herself. Yu Xiaoxiao slept a lot during the day, so she was immediately stirred awake by her older sister's movement. She rubbed her eyes, looked through the window paper, and noticed that it was still very early outside. She muttered, "Why are you waking up so early?" Yu Shaolian yawned as she put on a jacket that was covered with patches. She glanced at Madame Lu, who was sleeping on the Kong bed, and whispered, "Did I wake you up? Mother slept really late yesterday. I'll do more work and let her rest some more. It's still early, so you should sleep a little more." Xiaoxiao stared at this young girl's thin back. She was only an 8-year-old child. In modern times, she would just be an elementary school kid who was still acting like a spoiled child in front of her parents. However, she was already one of the major contributors in this family. In the courtyard, their grandmother began screaming again, "What time is it? Why haven't you started cooking yet? Don't think that you can't do whatever you want just because there's a patient in your family." This person was also someone who strategically chose her victims. She knew that Madame Lu had a soft personality and Yu Hai was an obedient son. Thus, she was able to grasp all of them within her hands. She was probably somewhat worried about old Yu, so she treated them slightly better when the men are home. Yu Xiaoxiao frowned with annoyance when she heard Madame Zhang shouting early in the morning again. She had a biased grandmother and her eldest aunt was always nitpicking on them. Furthermore, she also has a greedy and lazy older cousin who was always bullying them. In her previous life, she had raised her younger brother and sister up all by herself. Even though they were in a difficult situation, but they had never experienced such grievances. For these past few days, besides doing heavy household chores, Madame Lu also had to take care of her daughter at night. Thus, she barely had any time to sleep. Her body had originally been weak and she was so thin that she barely had any flesh on her body. Moreover, her face was so pale that there didn't seem to be a trace of blood on her face. She also had dark shadows under her eyes. Madame Lu hastily stood up when she heard the screaming outside. However, when she got off the bed, she staggered for a few steps before steadying herself. Yu Xiaoxiao hastily got off the Kong bed to support her mother, helped her sit on the bed, and said, "Mother, your health doesn't seem that well either. You should rest some more. They won't starve just because you didn't cook for a day. If you got sick, then father would be heartbroken." Based on her observation, her new father, Yu Hai, not only spoiled his children, but he also loved his wife dearly. If he was at home, he would always rush to take over his wife's duties. However, he was usually out fishing, selling fish, and hunting every day. Thus, he seldom spent time at home. Otherwise, Madame Lu's health wouldn't have deteriorated so much. "You silly girl, where did you learn to speak like that?" A rosy blush emerged on Lu Muyan's wan face. "Xiaolian can't finish the work by herself. I'll go help her." Lu Muyan wanted to walk toward the door to leave, but she was pulled back to sit on the bed by her daughter. "Just ignore grandmother. She's on menopause. Just pretend you can't hear her complaints and don't take her words to heart." Yu Xiaoxiao paused briefly before she suddenly shouted loudly, "Mother, mother! What's wrong? Grandmother, come in quickly. My mother fainted." Lu Muyun sat on edge of the Kong bed and stared at her daughter dumbfoundedly. Before she could even reacted, Yu Xiaoxiao swiftly whispered to her, "Mother, you fainted. Out of exhaustion. Why aren't you lying down?" After her younger daughter woke up from her injuries, she became more intelligent. She also has a brighter and sharper disposition. However, she didn't know who her daughter had learned this from. Lu Muyun lightly tapped her little forehead and lay down cooperatively. As soon as Lu Muyun closed her eyes, Madame Zhang pushed the door open and came in while grumbling, "What's the matter now? Such a troublesome family. Xiaoxiao, why did your mother faint?" "My mother hasn't slept for days in order to take care of me. When grandmother was yelling that no one was cooking earlier, she got up in a hurry and fell down to the ground. She's still unconscious now. I helped her onto the Kong bed after much difficulty. Grandmother, we should ask Dr. Yu to come check on her. I'm so scared that my mother won't wake up." "What?" Yu Xiaoxiao covered her face with her hands and pretended to cry. Madame Zhang wrinkled her brows and looked at her second daughter-in-law, who was so skinny that she barely had any flesh on her body. She couldn't help muttering inwardly, "Yu Hai's sickly wife wouldn't really have gotten sick, right? If she's really ill, then we'll have to spend money again." She turned towards Yu Xiaoxiao and said, "There's no need to call for a doctor. Your mother is just sleeping because she's too tired. Stop being so easily scared. Don't bother your mother and let her rest some more." When Madame Zhang went out and heard her eldest daughter-in-law indiscreetly making remarks about no one cooking, she finally exploded in anger. "Eat, eat, eat. You won't die by just missing a meal. Is it not enough that our family was already in a mess? Stop being so noisy in the morning. If you want to eat earlier, then make it yourself. Can't you see that Xiaolian is busy working now?" Xiaoxiao's younger aunt, Yu Katie, quietly came out of her own room. She picked up some firewood and wanted to go to the kitchen to make a fire. However, Madame Zhang was unwilling to let her daughter cook. She swiftly picked up a broom and smacked the arm of her eldest daughter-in-law, who was leaning against the wall and basking in the sun. "You're such a tactless person. Hurry up and go cook. You want your youngest sister-in-law, who is still in her teens, to serve you." Yu Xiaoxiao was speechless by her words. She was just selfishly taking care of her own daughter without concern about other people's daughters. Yu Xiaolian was only 8 years old and much younger than her daughter. Xiaolian was busily working throughout the day, yet she didn't even care. However, her heart ached just because her daughter was carrying a bundle of firewood. Madame Li covered her arm that was hit and grumbled as she entered the kitchen. She grudgingly made a fire and began preparing breakfast while cursing. When Yu Xiaoxiao saw that her mother had fallen asleep shortly after lying on the bed, she quietly left the room and gently closed the door. She took a basin and went to help Xiaolian feed the chickens. However, Yu Xiaolian quickly grabbed it from her. She looked at her bandaged head and whispered, "You're still injured. How can I let you work? Are you hungry? Go sit down first. Breakfast will be ready soon." Madame Li hasn't worked in the kitchen for many years, so she was sweating profusely while preparing breakfast for the entire family. During this era, people ate twice a day, which was usually around 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. However, it was nearly noon when breakfast was finally served. The bean paste soup, 1, tasted burnt, while the mixed flour flatbread, 2, was so dry that it could choke people to death. The eldest son, Yu Dawson, had just returned from fishing. After tasting the bean paste soup and flatbread, he couldn't hold back his anger. "How are people supposed to eat this? The flatbread is also as hard as a rock. Is it even edible? Ask your wife. I asked her to cook and she was in the kitchen since 9 in the morning. However, this was what she made after working in the kitchen for nearly 4 hours. Madame Zhang broke off a piece of flatbread and tried hard to chew it in her mouth. She finally swallowed it after drinking 2 mouthfuls of the bean paste soup. The Yu family's bean paste soup was made with soybean powder and mixed with a small amount of millet. There was originally a strong bean flavor within the soup, so the taste became even more sour when burnt. Where's second daughter-in-law? Why didn't she come out to cook? Old Yu's brows creased as he set down the flatbread in his hand and asked. Yu Xiaosao swiftly answered, my mother was so exhausted that she fainted. She's still unconscious and lying on the Kong bed. What? Your mother fainted? I'll go check on her. Yu Hai hastily rushed towards his room without even eating. Why did she faint? What did the doctor say? Old Yu had seen his second daughter-in-law taking care of his younger granddaughter without rest. Grandmother didn't let us call for a doctor. She said my mother will be fine after sleeping. Yu Xiaosao found the perfect opportunity to tattle. Nonsense. When we finish eating, go ask Dr. Yu to come and check on second daughter-in-law. Don't let a minor illness turn into a major illness. Old Yu frowned as he forced himself to finish the bean paste soup and wiped his mouth. Madame Zhang reluctantly muttered, we'll have to spend money if we seek a doctor. Our third son needs to participate in the district examination soon. He'll need to travel to the prefectural city for the examination. If we waste all our money on Yu Hai's family and can't gather enough money for travel expenses, then he would definitely be resentful towards you. Old Yu frowned, slammed his chopsticks on the table, and said, our family isn't as poor as you're making us out to be. Every year, Yu Hai earns more than a dozen taels, one from just hunting, let alone his earnings from fishing daily. Our third son has been studying for so many years, but he hasn't even passed the county-level examination. I reckon he should stop studying. He should just save some money to buy a few acres of land to farm on. With the Yu family's circumstances, if they weren't funding for their third son's studies for more than a decade, they could live more comfortably. Even if they freely ate white rice and wheat flour on a daily basis, they would still have more than enough to eat. However, the payments for a private tutor and the cost of living in town were enough to wear down a middle-class farming family. What, old man? The fortune teller had said that someone in our family is fated to become a government official. I'm still counting on our third son to earn me a title of noble madam. Even if I must give up everything, I'll still fund his studies. Although Madame Zhang was slightly afraid of her husband, she decided to fight to the end for her son's future and her own glory. Old Yu glared at his wife, but didn't continue on the topic. He threw the bowl in his hand and spoke in a muffled voice, I'll go tidy our 3 acres of farmland. By the way, Shaolian, go cook a bowl of noodles for your mother and add 2 fried eggs in it. She must have been exhausted from these past few days. All right, thank you, grandfather. Yu Xiaosao rushed to answer in a loud voice and had a bright smile on her face. Shaolian, you wretch, why are you still dawdling in the room? Can't you see that it's about to rain? Hurry up and go retrieve the clothes that are being dried. Every day, Yu Xiaosao was woken up by her grandmother's shrill scolding. Madame Lu, who was used to being oppressed by her mother-in-law, wanted to get up out of habit. However, Yu Hai stopped her, you should rest some more. I'll go take a look. It was unsuitable to sail out to the sea because it was too windy today. Thus, Yu Hai was able to idle at home on this rare occasion. After changing his clothes, he came in again and spoke to his sons. Today is the 2nd day of June and the tide is receding right now. I just went out to check. It's cloudy and the wind is blowing in the southwest direction. More marine goods could be found when the tide recedes quickly. Thus, it's the best weather to go gather food by the sea. Let's go. Father will take you guys to search for some oysters, crabs, fish, and shrimp. If we're lucky, we might even find abalone. Collecting seafood by the sea. Father, I've never gathered food at the sea before. I want to go too. Bring me along. In her previous life, Lin Xiaowen's hometown was located in the inner regions. She had only seen the ocean once in the 29 years that she had been alive. It was all thanks to that one time she had visited her younger sister, who was studying in a university beside the sea. She had transmigrated to this fishing village for about 5 or 6 days. However, Madame Lu had kept her at home in order to recover from her injury. She never went out of the house, let alone go to the sea. When Yu Xiaoxiao heard that there was a chance to go gather food at the sea, she decided that she'll follow along even if she had to throw a fit. Well, wasn't she a child now? Thus, she had the right to be willful and mischievous. Madame Lu had been frightened and quickly coaxed her daughter, "It's windy today and your injury hasn't completely healed yet. Wait a few more days and I'll let you go anywhere you want. I won't stop you." Xiaoxiao refused to comply. She was about to become moldy from staying at home. Moreover, today was a rare opportunity for her. Her father, an excellent fisherman, was going to accompany them, so they would definitely catch a lot of seafood. How can she miss this perfect opportunity? "Mother, Grandpa, you had already said that my injury is fine and I'm also much healthier now. My health is really good now and I also have a great appetite. Grandpa, you said that moving around more is good for my health. Please let me go with them." As she spoke, Yu Xiaoxiao looked at her father, who was known for pampering his children endlessly, with a pleading gaze. Yu Hai had never been able to refuse his youngest daughter, so he immediately surrendered. "Muyun, I'll look after Xiaoxiao, so don't worry. Rest at home with ease and wait for us to come back. We'll catch some abalones and make congee for you, to nourish your body." As he spoke, he signaled his younger daughter with his eyes, telling her to quickly leave the room. Thus, Yu Xiaoxiao happily pushed the door open and left. In the courtyard, Yu Hang had already prepared all the equipment needed for collecting seafood by the sea. With a bucket and shovel in their hands, Shaolian and Shido happily waited for their father to come out. In the children's hearts, there's nothing that their father wasn't capable of. They were already anticipating fruitful results before they had even left. In June, the cloudy Dongshan village was hot and humid. Xiaoxiao, who was only wearing a single thin garment, held a small bamboo basket as she tried to keep up with her father's footsteps. Yu Hai, who was tall and burly, seemed to be over 1.8 meters tall too. The 8-year-old Yu Xiaoxiao was chronically ill for a long period of time, so she about half a head shorter than Yu Shaolian, who was just 15 minutes older than her. She was already doing her best to move forward with her short legs, but she was still falling behind them. Yu Hai was constantly paying attention to his children and noticed his younger daughter's situation. He chuckled, lifted her up with one arm, and carried her on his shoulder. Yu Xiaoxiao was initially somewhat nervous and embarrassed. Mentally, she was almost the same as Yu Hai, but she was still being treated like a child. Even Shido, who was 5 years old, didn't receive this kind of treatment. Thus, Xiaoxiao couldn't help blushing. As the eldest brother, Yu Heng was also quietly observing his frail youngest sister. When he noticed that her face was flushed, he handed her a straw hat woven with bamboo strips. He spoke with concern, "Youngest sister, although it's cloudy today, but you're rarely exposed to the sun. Thus, it's very easy for you to get sunburned. See, your face is already red." During ancient times, time was calculated based on the lunar calendar and June was considered to be midsummer. Even though it was cloudy by the seashore, the intensity of the UV rays wasn't low. However, the redness on Yu Xiaoxiao's face wasn't due to the sun. The lowest tide phase was a rare opportunity for the villagers of Dongshan village to increase their incomes. Experienced old fishermen were already familiar with the time for the ebb tide. Today, the lowest tide period was around noon. The mudflat was already full of men and women of all ages who came to gather seafood. Yu Hai's family had arrived late, so all the good spots were already taken. Shido was slightly disappointed and muttered, "If it hadn't taken eldest aunt so long to prepare a meal, we could have gotten a good spot." Yu Hai caressed his little head and said with a smile, "Don't be discouraged. Father knows a good spot. I can guarantee that no one else will be there." The good spot that Yu Hai mentioned was a region of reefs beside a cliff. The location of these reefs was rather dangerous. It was usually covered by the sea and hit by high waves during high tide. The only time it emerged completely was when the tide completely recedes. Moreover, this place was far from the village and most people wouldn't think of coming this way. The sea reefs in this area seemed dangerous, but it was actually just difficult to reach. It was hard to pass the cliff on the way to the reefs. However, This was a simple matter for Yu Hai. He helped the children pass the difficult paths one by one and bypass a cliff. Their eyes lit up when they finally reached their destination. A vast region of reefs appeared in front of the children. When Shaolian and Shido cheerfully ran over, a trail of waves followed them. Yu Heng was slightly more calm. However, when he saw the large amount of seafood on the reefs, he couldn't resist bending down to gather the food more quickly. Yu Xiaosao quietly stood on top of the reef, while letting the cool sea breeze blow on her face. A vision of blue greeted her eyes as both the sky and sea were saturated with a pure azure color. It was such a transparent color. Even blue jade, of the best quality, couldn't compare to the clarity and brilliance of the sea and sky. This was the sea without the slightest trace of pollution. Yu Xiaosao fell into a trance that she couldn't break away from, while being mesmerized by the scenery in front of her. Cower, come here, put on these sharkskin boots. Your feet are different from your siblings. They're already used to running around the shoals on the beach. If you run around the reef like them, then the bottoms of your feet will be ripped to shreds. She didn't expect the stalwart Yu Hai to be so attentive. He had actually thought of the fact that his younger daughter's tender feet had no defense against the rough surface. Yu Xiaosao, who was dazzled by the beautiful scene in front of her, woke up from her trance and put on the boots happily. Though the boots were slightly big, they could still be worn. She learned from the others and bent down to thoroughly search around the reefs. Sure enough, this was an area that hadn't been discovered by others. Soon, Yu Xiaosao found a type of black shellfish. She carefully picked it up and presented it to Yu Hai, as if it was treasure. She said excitedly, "Father, I found a shellfish. Do you think it's edible?" Yu Hai took a look and replied with a smile, "This is a mussel. The meat is delicious and also very nourishing. It's also known as eggs of the sea. Pick up as much as you can. If we can get a lot of them, then we can dry them and sell them at a good price in town during the winter." Eggs of the sea, doesn't that mean it's very nutritious? Our family does need to eat more nutritious meals. Alright, she should pick up a lot. We're not going to sell them. We'll just eat them ourselves. She could just imagine the delicious spicy stir-fried clams that she ate in her previous life. Xiaosao almost drooled as she thought about it. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to pick them up. I'm going to pick all of them up. Huh, eldest brother, why are you knocking on that? Is that also edible? Xiaosao had suddenly arrived beside Yu Hang. When she went over for a closer look, she saw him striking something that was as hard as gray limestone with a shovel. Thus, she got curious and asked. It was his youngest sister's first time coming to gather food at the sea, so Yu Hang was very patient as he explained to her, "This is called barnacle. Come look, doesn't its shape look like the tooth of a horse? The barnacle doesn't look like anything special, but it's very tasty when the meat is stewed with just clear water." Yu Xiaosao took the shovel that her eldest brother handed her and knocked hard on it. As expected, she found soft meat within the crushed shell. She happily picked it up and placed it into a small bamboo basket. Ah, isn't this an oyster? It's very tasty when roasted. Shortly afterwards, Xiaosao was surprised to find another type of seafood. She shouted in astonishment as she pried it out from the crack in the reef. Little Shido laughed at his sister's ignorance. "Second sister, that's a halazi. The town folks call them muli. After drying them, we can sell them to a pharmacy." Muli was just another name for oysters, alright. It was just different names for the same thing. Yu Xiaosao glared at him resentfully, then continued her treasure hunting journey on the reefs. "Snails. It's a little small, but we can still eat it. I'm taking it. Starfish. It looks quite pretty. Is it edible? Whatever, I'll just pick it up first. Sea urchin. It looks like a hedgehog. Is it also edible? Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up." Wow, look at what she found. There was a little octopus between the cracks of the rock. Ha ha ha, you can't escape. Ellipsis ellipsis. Yu Xiaosao was very busy on the reef and had unknowingly filled up the bamboo bucket. However, she continued to pry and pick up seafood excitedly. Yu Xiaosao was very enthusiastic about her first harvesting trip at the sea. Moreover, she was thrilled by her rewarding results. Without her knowledge, she had gradually moved farther and farther away from her father and siblings. She followed the reef and arrived at the edge of the cliff. Huh, what's that in the water? A person. Yu Xiaoxiao was startled. Was it a corpse of someone who had drowned? So unlucky. Father, father, quick, come here. Even the tone of Yu Xiaoxiao's voice has changed and carried an unconscious sense of tension and fear. Yu Hai quickly followed her voice and went over. What's wrong? What happened? Are you all right, Xiaoxiao? Father, look, over there. Is that a dead body? Yu Xiaoxiao loudly shouted as she pointed towards the object floating nearby. Yu Hai looked towards the direction that his daughter was pointing at. She's right. Did a fisherman from a nearby fishing village suffer a shipwreck? It began to be windy around noon and the waves were even stronger in the sea. So, it was quite possible that someone had encountered a shipwreck. After promptly making a decision, he took off his upper garment and plunged into the sea. It seemed like the wind was even stronger now. A thundering roar sounded as the waves pounded against the cliff reefs. Yu Xiaoxiao nervously shouted at her father, Father, be careful. There's a lot of rocks on the bottom, so be careful and don't hurt yourself. When Yu Hai emerged above the water, he was already several meters away from Xiaoxiao. He heard his daughter's concerned words and waved at her. After that, he continued to swim towards the person who was floating in the sea. Yu Heng and his siblings didn't care about collecting seafood anymore. They all gathered together and watched as their father swam closer to the unconscious person. Yu Hai swam against the waves and dragged the person, who had drowned, back to the reef. However, he was already exhausted by the time he returned. Yu Heng and Xiaolian helped their father pull that person onto the reef. The young man, who was dressed in a completely black outfit, appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old. At this time, his face was pale and his eyes were tightly shut. His long eyelashes were like small fans that were stuck to the bottom of his eyes, while there wasn't even a trace of blood on his plump lips. It seems like he's still breathing. Yu Xiaoxiao placed her finger under the young man's tall nose and exclaimed in pleasant surprise. Yu Hai, who was still exhausted, carried the young man on his shoulder with his head facing downwards. When he pushed the young man's stomach with the edge of his shoulder, a gush of seawater came out of the young man's mouth. Yu Hai jolted him a few more times, until the young man stopped throwing up seawater, before putting him down again. Father, can he still be saved? Yu Xiaoxiao worriedly asked when she saw that the handsome young man was still unconscious. Yu Hai examined the young man's limbs and affirmed, he didn't drown for a very long time. If no accidents occur, he can still be saved. Did anyone bring water? Feed him some. Father, didn't he drown? Why are you feeding him water when his stomach was already full of water? Yu Xiaoxiao untied the leather bag, which was filled with mystic stone water, from her waist and asked in confusion. I know. Little Shido clapped his hands as he spoke, the seawater is salty. If you drink too much salt, you'll definitely be thirsty. Of course, you'll drink water when you're thirsty. Yu Xiaoxiao was amused by her younger brother's childish remark. She pinched his cheeks and laughed. Well, it seems like you know a lot. Yu Hai, who sat on the reef wearily, looked at his children and chuckled. Feeding water to a person who had drowned is to prevent him from dehydrating. Little Shido is also correct. It's harmful for the body to consume too much seawater. Yu Xiaoxiao asked Yu Heng to support the young man into a partially reclining position. She carefully parted the young man's purplish lips and fed the mystic stone water into his mouth. That day the little divine stone had wanted to show off its abilities by healing her injury, but it used up all its powers to heal her wound. Thus, it was unable to maintain its spiritual form and had disappeared for many days. Xiaoxiao bathed the rainbow stone in spring water every day, but she still didn't see the appearance of the divine stones. Spiritual form. It's so worrisome. However, after the little divine stone exhibited its mystical powers, Yu Xiaoxiao no longer doubted it. Xiaoxiao would boil the spring water, that the stone bathed in, for her family to drink. It does seem rather effective so far, at least for herself. Her health wasn't as shabby as when she had just transmigrated here. He's awake. He woke up. Xiaolian's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned towards the sound. The young man's thick eyelashes lightly fluttered before he slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were dazzling and captivating, and seemed to be as deep as the sea and as bright as the stars. Were you the ones who rescued me? The young man's voice was very clear, with a slight sense of indifference and coldness. It was like the spring water from an ancient pond found inside a deep mountain, exceptionally cool. Yu Xiaoxiao smiled faintly and softly said, "We were collecting seafood by the sea when we suddenly noticed you. My father is an excellent swimmer, so he went to save you. You, it's great that you're all right." Zhu Junyang's indifferent gaze focused on the young girl in front of him, who looked around 5 or 6 years old. Author note: I'm 8 years old. 8 years old. Her skin was even lighter and more flawless than the winter snow, while her hair looked slightly withered and yellow. Her lips were delicate and soft, like light pink-colored petals. She was clearly just a thin and weak girl from a poor peasant's family. However, she gave him a calm and gentle feeling, like a spring breeze. This feeling was very different from those noble ladies, who were like mad dogs after a bone whenever they saw him. They obviously wanted to jump on him, but still acted disgustingly pretentious. At least, this peasant girl wasn't annoying. "Thank you very much. Did you happen to see anyone else?" Zhu Junyang deeply regretted not listening to the experienced captain's advice and chose a day with such weather for testing out the new ships. As a result, however, this also proved that this new batch of vessels from the shipyard were unsuitable for ocean voyages. It couldn't even withstand such a small storm. How could it travel to the foreign lands that royal uncle had mentioned? Other people, did they count? Yu Hai asked, with amazement and admiration, as he pointed towards a sturdy 2-decker ship in the distance. That was definitely a ship for ocean voyages. It was multiple times bigger than their family's new fishing ship. If he could also have such a he needed to stop daydreaming. "Master, my little ancestor. Where are you? Please be safe and well." The head steward of Prince Jing's estate, who was rescued after the shipwreck, really wanted to strangle himself with a rope right now. If he had known this would happen, then he would have risked his life to stop the young prince from boarding the ship. After the ship was wrecked, nearly everyone was rescued except for Royal Prince Yang. This matter was about to be the cause of his death. "Quickly go find him. Continue to search," the head steward loudly ordered with a sharp voice. The old captain, who had tried to stop the trial voyage earlier, noticed that they were getting closer and closer to the cliff. He hesitated and said, "Head steward, there are a lot of submerged reefs ahead and the waves are also stronger. If we continue to move closer, our second ship will also be destroyed. I don't care if our second ship is also destroyed. Even if another 20 or 30 ships are wrecked, we still need to find the young prince. Otherwise, everyone on this ship should prepare for death." Since the head steward had given his command, they had to continue the search. Their lives were on the line for this matter. "Then, let's send out several lifeboats." The old captain offered the most beneficial option. On the faraway reef, Yu Xiaoxiao observed the young man's wet clothes. Ordinary people definitely wouldn't be able to afford the materials of his clothes. This handsome young man has an impressive background. They probably came to search for you. My father said that there are a lot of reefs under the sea in this area, so it's hard for ships to approach. If you still have strength, it's better for you to swim over. Yu Xiaoxiao logically analyzed. Zhu Junyang's entire body felt soft and powerless right now. He could hardly stand up, so how would he still have the energy to swim over? Second sister, quickly come and look. Numerous small boats came out of that big ship. Shido pointed at the distance and shouted. After leaving the ship, around 10 boats set off towards different directions in the stormy waves. One of the boats, which was led by the head steward and personally operated by the old captain, sailed towards their direction. "Hey, over here. The person who you're looking for is over here." Yu Xiaoxiao picked up some kelps on the reef and shook it with her hands. The small boats seemed to have saw her action and accelerated their speed. "Head steward, we really can't go any further ahead. Otherwise, not only would we be unable to rescue the young prince, but we'll also be sacrificed along with the wrecked boat." When everyone on the boat saw the small figure waving a long green strip on the reef, they quickly rowed over with anticipation. However, they were trapped by the reefs under the sea. The head steward rubbed his hands anxiously and turned towards the sailors. "Who is the best swimmer here? Go and check if the young prince is over there. If he is, then bring him back with you." The sailors looked at each other. If they went into the sea with such strong waves, would they even be able to survive? Moreover, They also had to bring another person along while swimming. The head steward asked several times and even offered a reward, but no one dared to go into the water. Yu Hai, who was resting on the reef, had already recovered his energy. When he saw that the small boat had stopped, he immediately understood their situation. The boat can't cross this part of the sea. Let me help you swim over. Yu Hai really deserved the reputation of being the best swimmer in Dongshan village. He took the young man and swam through the stormy waves. He swiftly passed the rocky area and arrived near the lifeboat. Quick, it's the young prince. Hurry and go receive him. When the head steward saw the figure in the sea, he cried with excitement. His head was finally saved after much difficulty. When the sailors hastily pulled Royal Prince Yong onto the lifeboat, the head steward rushed over while sobbing, "My little master." This old servant had finally found you. Then, he burst into another cry of loyalty. Seeing the disordered situation on the boat, Yu Hai didn't greet the people on the boat. Instead, he swam back as he was worried about his children who were still on the rocky reef. By the time the young prince finally stopped the commotion caused by the head steward and remembered his savior, Yu Hai had already returned to the reef. Zhu Junyang looked intently towards the direction of the reef. An image of a fragile and wan little face lingered within his mind. After the brief episode, the Yu family continued hunting for seafood on the reefs. Oh, what's this? A big and translucent mushroom. Did mushrooms also grow on underwater shoals? How strange. Youngest sister, don't move. Yu Heng was extremely relieved that he decided to look towards his youngest sister. He was so frightened that he was drenched in cold sweat right now. Yu Heng quickly ran over and almost stumbled on the uneven reef. He pulled Xiao Xiao's skinny hand away, breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "This is a jellyfish, which is poisonous. If you got strung, it could be fatal. Wait for a moment. You can take it after I take care of it." He used the sharp shovel in his hand to remove the jellyfish's tentacles and warned, "If you see this in the future, remember not to touch its tentacles. It's highly poisonous." Yu Xiaoxiao rubbed her nose, embarrassed by her ignorance. She was a girl who lived in the inner regions of the mainland, so she didn't understand the dangers of the sea. It just looked like a milky white and crystal-like mushroom, but it actually had the potential to be deadly. She really learned something new today. Slosh. The siblings heard the sound of slashing nearby and turned their heads towards the direction of the sound. They looked over and saw Yu Hai coming out of the water. He wasn't wearing an upper garment, exposing his lean and sturdy chest. "Cower, look at what I found." Yu Hai exclaimed with a grin and revealed a mouth full of white teeth, which made his complexion appear even darker. However, his tan skin made him look even more masculine. Little Shito immediately rushed over and shouted, "Abalone! It's an abalone. Father, you found abalones." Xiao Xiao was curious and hastily went over. She saw several dark greenish-brown colored shellfish within Yu Hai's big hands. Each one was around 10 centimeters in length and looked rather unassuming. Was this the highly popular abalone? Such a large abalone would cost at least a few hundred copper coins, one if we sell it in town. Father got 9 of them. If we sell them to a big restaurant, we should be able to get 2 or 3 taels. Yu Shaolian also came over and exclaimed in surprise. 2 or 3 taels. Based on Xiao Xiao's understanding of the current economy, 2 or 3 taels can buy 3 to 400 caddies, 2 of first-class white rice, 100 caddies of first-class pork, around 70 or 80 chubby live chickens. 2 to 3 taels were enough to buy 1 year's worth of food for her entire family, which consisted of over 10 people. However, Yu Xiaoxiao knew an abalone's nutritional value. Her original plan of using the abalones to nourish her family's health was disrupted by the value of abalones. Xiaoxiao had a basic grasp of her new grandmother's personality. With her grandmother's temperament, she would tear down whoever dared to suggest that they eat the abalones. If they take them home, then it would just be like throwing a meat bun at a dog. It will never return. Yu Xiaoxiao's eyes darted about. Then she acted like a spoiled child and asked, "Father, are these all for me?" After hesitating for a moment, Yu Hai nodded and said, "I already mentioned it earlier, if we find abalones, we'll use it to cook nutritious foods for you and your mother. We were quite lucky today. If we can't finish them, then we can slowly eat them after they're dried." Yu Heng and Yu Shaolian casted a skeptical gaze at their father. They knew exactly what kind of person their father was. He was someone who would work wholeheartedly without any complaint. Even if Madame Zhang made unreasonable demands, he would never refute her. Even Shido, who was 5 years old, knew that if they brought the abalones back, then they wouldn't even be able to touch them, let alone slowly eat them. Yu Hai felt uncomfortable by the way his children were staring at him. He pretended to cough and bent down to carefully put the abalones into the bucket. Yu Xiaoxiao's eyes darted around and said, "Father, let me handle the abalones." Yu Hai stuffed the abalones, which were worth around 3 taels, into his daughter's hands without hesitation. He stood up, looked at the sky, and said, "It's getting late. We collected a lot of seafood today, so let's go back now." Yu Xiaoxiao poured all the seafood within her basket into her father's large barrel, and then carefully placed the abalones inside her basket. She looked around and ran towards the cliff. She picked up some kelp and sea lettuce, and then used them to securely cover the abalones. They really collected a lot of seafood today. The barrel that Yu Hai was carrying was as tall as Shido and filled with their harvest. Yu Heng and Xiaolian were also holding small buckets that were full to the brim. Even little Shitu's small basket was packed with seafood. On the way back, villagers, who they were acquainted with, greeted them with admiration. "Dahai is seriously still the most skilled among us. He arrived later than us, but he also obtained so much more than all of us. Brother Dahai, this mussel that you caught is at least 20 to 30 catties. When it's dried, it would still weigh around 5 catties. Brother Dahai never fails whenever he makes a move. Do you have any tips? Teach me some." The speaker was a young man in his mid-20s. He had a short stature, upright face, and tanned complexion. In order to prevent disputes when hunting at the sea, the villagers each have their own fixed spots. Thus, their results would depend on their own luck. However, it was different for Yu Hai. He didn't frequently gather seafood at the sea, but he returned with fruitful results every time. Many of the villagers wanted to learn from him, but they couldn't bring themselves to ask. After all, it was his own know-how to make a living and feed his family. If they learned his skills, it would be the same as snatching food from his mouth. It was fortunate that Lu Xuanju was close friends with Yu Hai. If another person asked, they might end up having a fallout. "Uncle Xuanju, there are a lot of reefs around the cliff that no one has been to. You can go check it out when the tide recedes." Yu Heng knew Lu Xuanju was close friends with his father, so he didn't hide it from him. However, he didn't reveal his family's treasured hunting spot. Lu Xuanju looked at the villagers who were eavesdropping on them and laughed loudly. "Xiaoxia, do you think we can climb cliffs, hike up mountains, and enter the sea, just like your father? It's so dangerous over at the cliff. That was where Uncle Lu Si died. Your Uncle Xuanju still wants to live for a few more years." Yang Fan's wife walked over with her daughter and asked, "Dahai, where's your wife?" She wasn't feeling very well today, so she stayed at home to rest. "How's brother Yang Fan's leg?" Li Yangfan was another good friend of Yu Hai. He recently encountered a storm on his way back from the sea. His ship crashed into a reef and he injured his leg. Thus, he was recuperating at home right now. Yang Fan's wife asked about Lu Muyan's health with concern, then replied, "He's fine. The injury on his leg wasn't very serious. However, our family's ship was damaged quite badly. Dahai, when you're free, can you come over to check if it can be fixed?" Everyone in the nearby fishing villages knew Yu Hai was a very capable person. When it came to fishing in the sea, even 3 to 5 ordinary people were incomparable to him. A recent example would be early spring this year. At that time, old Yu's family caught a shark that weighed around 300 catties. They had earned several taels with just the shark's fin. It's not that the villagers were looking down on old Yu and his stepson, but without Yu Hai, they wouldn't even be enough to feed a shark, let alone to hunt for a shark. In addition to his fishing and hunting skills, Yu Hai also learned how to repair ships without a teacher. He was capable of fixing most issues and defects of a normal fishing ship. Thus, although many villagers of Dongshan village were envious of Yu Hai's skills, they would only gossip behind his back and wouldn't dare to offend him. "All right, tomorrow, when I return from the mountains, I'll go over to take a look." Yang Fan's wife, "Here's some barnacles meats. Brother Yang Fan really likes eating this. Take some back for him, so he can eat it when he drinks wine. Little Shatu's basket was filled with barnacles meats and Yu Hai generously offered them without any hesitation. Yang Fan's wife smiled and shook her head. She looked at the quiet Xiao Xiao, who was standing beside them, and said, "Keep it for the children to eat." "Xiao Xiao, how's your health? Does your head still hurt?" Yu Xiao Xiao politely smiled at her and replied, "It doesn't hurt anymore. Grandpa, you said I can take off the bandage in 2 days." Yu Hai briefly chatted with them before taking the children home. When he entered the door, he saw his wife, who was supposed to be resting inside the room, serving dinner from the kitchen. Thus, his expression immediately turned grim. "Oh, you guys caught quite a lot of good things at the sea today. We're going to have a feast tomorrow." Madame Li's piercing voice sounded behind them. Yu Xiaolian was so angry that she threw the bucket on the ground and shouted at her eldest aunt, who was halfway into her room, "Eldest aunt, didn't grandmother tell you to cook at home? You were wandering around the village and had just returned. You just want everyone to starve, right?" Madame Li glanced at her, but she didn't actually care about that little brat. She sneered, "Someone can pretend to be sick, but I'm not allowed to go out for an errand. How dare you speak to me like that? You have no manners at all. If you're not careful, you won't be able to get married in the future." Yu Xiaoxiao was infuriated. "Eldest aunt, who are you accusing of pretending to be sick? Didn't you see my mother fainting yesterday? You're such a healthy person, yet you're ordering a sick person to work. Moreover, you still think you're in the right. If you want to know whether my mother was faking her illness, then just invite Grandpa Yu over." Madame Zhang, who was inside her room, finally couldn't sit still anymore when she heard Xiao Xiao's words, "Li Guiwa, you lazy woman. You disappeared once it was time to cook and finally came back now. Why are you still chit-chatting? Hurry up and go help in the kitchen. We'll have to spend money if we call for a doctor." Madame Zhang walked to the entrance of the kitchen and jeered at Lu Muyun, who was working busily. "You should hurry up and go back to your room to rest. Your daughter's heart was aching for you. Are there any daughters who doesn't love their mothers? Mother, you sit down. I'll help you bring the dishes over." Yu Coyote came out of her room. She and the third son, Yu Bo, were the only ones within the family who could calm the old lady down. Madame Zhang turned her head and saw the seafood that Yu Hai and his children were holding. Her gloomy expression turned bright and she immediately smiled. "Give me the barrel. The seafood looks quite fresh. We can keep them overnight and let your eldest brother sell them to a restaurant in town tomorrow morning. Grandmother, let's keep some oysters and steam some to eat ourselves. I want to know what it tastes like," Yu Xiaoxiao deliberately suggested. Madame Zhang's expression instantly turned grim. She angrily said, "There are plenty of things that you haven't eaten before. If we sell them in town, 1 catty of oysters can be worth several copper coins. Won't you feel vexed for eating them?" If Yu Hai wasn't standing beside them, Madame Zhang would have made even harsher comments. She called for her daughter and didn't even spare the children's buckets. She wanted to take everything back to her room. As long as it was something that could be exchanged for money, she must grasp it within her own hands by all means. She turned around and looked at the basket within Yu Xiaoxiao's hands. She signaled with her lips and said, "Bring the basket you're holding into my room, too." Xiaoxiao pouted and replied resentfully, "Grandmother, you already took all the seafood. There are only kelp and sea lettuce in my basket, which aren't worth much money. We should just keep them and make cold dishes for grandfather to accompany his drinks in the evening." Madame Zhang stretched out her head to take a look. When she saw that it was only glossy and green kelp, she spoke as if she was showing mercy, "Just this once. In the future, I have the final say in everything within the family. You're not allowed to act on your own." Yu Xiaoxiao agreed. She waited for Madame Zhang to enter the main room before winking at Xiaolian and taking the small basket into the west room. Yu Xiaolian understood her meaning and got a worn-out earthenware jar from the corner of the kitchen. She filled it with some water and quietly followed her younger sister into the room. It was impossible to sell them today, so the sisters carefully placed the abalones inside the ceramic jar and hid them under the kelp. Yu Xiaoxiao was still worried, so she added some mystic stone water inside and hid the jar in a concealed place in the corner of the Kong bed. After that, she came out of the room again with the rest of the kelp. Yu Hai followed them inside and saw the sisters' actions. Xiaolian had always been a hot-tempered person. When she was angry, she had even dared to argue with Madame Zhang. Thus, she was frequently scolded and disciplined for her actions. Xiao Xiao's personality was also rather fierce now. However, she had more tricks up her sleeve and was also courageous. She decisively hid the expensive abalones. In the kitchen, Madame Lu was almost done preparing dinner. Yu Xiaoxiao went in and swiftly made shredded kelp with crushed garlic 1 and sea lettuce soup 2. Hence, dinner was much more lavish than in the past. During the meal, the men and women in the Yu family sat separately. On the women's side, each person had a dark-looking piece of pancake that was about the size of a palm. There were also poached vegetables that were seasoned with a small amount of salt and a bowl of bean paste soup. The staple food for the men was an unlimited amount of triple flour steamed buns, 3 which were made with a mixture of wheat flour, millet flour, and potato flour. Their meal also consisted of vegetables that were cooked with lard, and they drank the same soup as the womenfolk. However, this had nothing to do with the idea of men being superior over women. It was just that the men did hard labor that required a lot of energy and strength, so they needed to eat a nice and filling meal. Yu Xiaoxiao won unanimous praise for the 2 dishes that she personally prepared. The plate of shredded kelp with crushed garlic was savory and slightly spicy, while the sea lettuce soup tasted very fresh and full of flavors from the sea. Old Yu was especially fond of the shredded kelp with crushed garlic, and praised it endlessly. Madame Zhang couldn't stand seeing the second branch being complimented. She stuffed mouthfuls of shredded kelp into her mouth and said, "Xiaoxiao is rather capable. She can gather for seafood at the sea and help prepare meals. Dr. Yu had already said that her health is fine, so I reckon we can stop preparing separate meals for her in the future." Xiaoxiao was currently holding her savory congee and happily sharing with little Shido. However, her expression darkened when she heard her grandmother's remark. In the future, she would have to also eat the difficult-to-swallow coarse grain pancakes and disgusting bean paste soup. Ugh, it's going to be a painful torment. Luckily, those abalones weren't confiscated. Madame Zhang was satisfied upon seeing Xiaoxiao's expression. She appeared to be enjoying the coarse grain pancake even more now. She also ate more than half of the bowl of shredded kelp. Madame Li and her equally obese son were entirely focused on stuffing their mouths, so the rest of the shredded kelp and the sea lettuce soup were also devoured by them. When the plates were completely cleared, she pulled her son, who had wanted to continue eating at the men's table, back to their room stealthily. Xiaoxiao knew that they had gone to secretly eat by themselves again. Madame Li's maiden family had been poor at the time she married into the Yu family. Otherwise, she wouldn't had married the equally poor stepson of the Yu family. However, several years ago, her brothers earned some money through a small business and improved their family's circumstances. Madame Li was the youngest and only daughter in her family. Hence, every time she returned home, her parents, brothers, and sisters-in-law would provide her with some money and food to help her out. Otherwise, with the meals that the Yu family eats, how were Madame Li and her son able to become so fat? It was silent throughout the night after dinner. On the second day, in the west room, Yu Hai's family had all woken up at the first glimmer of dawn. Yu Hai and Hunter Zhao had agreed to go hunting in the mountains. Yu Heng and Yu Xiaolian had always gotten up at this time to collect fishworts and pick up firewood at the foot of the mountain. In the courtyard, Madame Lu was already cleaning the chicken and pig pens with a broom. Yu Xiaoxiao's family was surprised to see her waking up so early. Yu Hai touched her little head and said with a smile, "Sleep some more. It's still pretty dark outside." Yu Xiaoxiao was still concerned about an important matter within her heart, so she couldn't sleep anymore. She replied to her father with a smile, "Even little Shido is helping out with the chores. How can I be lazy when I'm his older sister? Father, you should hurry up. Don't make Uncle Zhao wait for a long time." Yu Hai didn't delay any further and swiftly gathered his belongings. He took the paper bag with 2 triple flour steamed buns wrapped up inside from Madame Lu and tied the water bag to his waist. After that, he got his homemade bow and hunting spear, and left. Yu Xiaoxiao took out the earthenware jar that she hid under the Kong bed yesterday. The abalones had become even more fresh after being nourished by the mystic stone water. Only a big restaurant can offer a good price for abalones of such good quality. However, she had just transmigrated here and hadn't even left the village before. So, how would she know the direction to town? Eldest brother, is our village far from town? While the main room and east room were still sleeping, Yu Xiaoxiao carried the ceramic pot and followed her older siblings out the door. Yu Heng gave her a weird look and asked, "It's quite far. It would take over 1 shichen by foot. Why are you asking? You wouldn't be thinking of taking these to sell in town, right?" He pointed at the earthenware jar in her hand as he spoke. Over 1 shichen. Doesn't that mean it would take at least 2 hours? Yu Xiaoxiao looked down at her own short legs, sighed, and said, "Are there any horse carriages or ox carts traveling to town in our village?"